What gets measured gets managed. Peter Drucker, management theorist, author of 31 books. 4 years ago, an economist changed my life forever. It's a shame I never had a chance to buy him a drink. My dear Vilfredo died almost 100 years ago. Vilfredo Pareto was a wily and controversial economist cum sociologist who lived from 1848 to 1923. An engineer by training, he started his varied career managing coal mines and later succeeded Léon Walras as the chair of political economy at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. His seminal work, Cours d'économie politique, included a then little explored law of income distribution that would later bear his name, Pareto's Law, or the Pareto distribution, in the last decade also popularly called the 80-20 principle. The mathematical formula he used to demonstrate a grossly uneven but predictable distribution of wealth in society, 80% of the wealth and income was produced and possessed by 20% of the population, also applied outside of economics. Indeed, it could be found almost everywhere. 80% of Pareto's garden peas were produced by 20% of the pea pods he had planted, for example. Pareto's law can be summarized as follows. 80% of the outputs result from 20% of the inputs. Alternative ways to phrase this, depending on the context, include 80% of the consequences flow from 20% of the causes. 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort and time. 80% of company profits come from 20% of the products and customers. 80% of all stock market gains are realized by 20% of the investors and 20% of an individual portfolio. The list is infinitely long and diverse, and the ratio is often skewed even more severely. 90-10, 95-5, and 99-1 are not uncommon, but the minimum ratio to seek is 80-20. When I came across Pareto's work one late evening, I had been slaving away with 15-hour days, 7 days per week, feeling completely overwhelmed and generally helpless. I would wake up before dawn to make calls to the United Kingdom, handle the US during the normal 9-to-5 day, and then work until near midnight making calls to Japan and New Zealand. I was stuck on a runaway freight train with no brakes, shoveling coal into the furnace for lack of a better option. Faced with certain burnout or giving Pareto's ideas a trial run, I opted for the latter. The next morning, I began a dissection of my business and personal life through the lenses of two questions. 1. Which 20% of sources are causing 80% of my problems and unhappiness? 2. Which 20% of sources are resulting in 80% of my desired outcomes and happiness? For the entire day, I put aside everything seemingly urgent and did the most intense truth-bearing analysis possible. Applying these questions to everything from my friends to customers and advertising to relaxation activities. Don't expect to find you're doing everything right. The truth often hurts. The goal is to find your inefficiencies in order to eliminate them and to find your strengths so you can multiply them. In the 24 hours that followed, I made several simple but emotionally difficult decisions that literally changed my life forever and enabled the lifestyle I now enjoy. The first decision I made is an excellent example of how dramatic and fast the ROI of this analytical fat cutting can be. I stopped contacting 95% of my customers and fired 2%, leaving me with the top 3% of producers to profile and duplicate. Out of more than 120 wholesale customers, a mere 5 were bringing in 95% of the revenue. I was spending 98% of my time chasing the remainder, as the aforementioned 5 ordered regularly without any follow-up calls, persuasion, or cajoling. In other words, I was working because I felt as though I should be doing something from 9 to 5. I didn't realize that working every hour from 9 to 5 isn't the goal. It's simply the structure most people use, whether it's necessary or not. I had a severe case of work for work, W4W, the most hated acronym in the NR vocabulary. All, and I mean 100% of my problems and complaints came from this unproductive majority, with the exception of 2 large customers who were simply world-class experts of the "here is the fire I started, now you put it out" approach to business. I put all of these unproductive customers on passive mode. If they ordered, great, let them fax in the order. If not, I would do absolutely no chasing, no phone calls, no email, nothing. That left the 2 larger customers to deal with, who were professional ball breakers but contributed about 10% to the bottom line at the time. You'll always have a few of these, and it is a quandary that causes all sorts of problems, not the least of which are self-hatred and depression. Up to that point, I had taken their browbeating, insults, time-consuming arguments, and tirades as a cost of doing business. I realized during the 80-20 analysis that these 2 people were the source of nearly all my unhappiness and anger throughout the day. It had usually spilled over into my personal time, keeping me up at night with the usual, I should have said X, Y, and Z to that penis self-flagellation. I finally concluded the obvious. The effect on my self-esteem and state of mind just wasn't worth the financial gain. I didn't need the money for any precise reason, and I had assumed I needed to take it. The customers are always right, aren't they? Part of doing business, right? Hell no. Not for the NR, anyway. I fired their asses and enjoyed every second of it. The first conversation went like this. Customer: what the bleep? I ordered 2 cases and they arrived 2 days late. Note, he had sent the order to the wrong person via the wrong medium despite repeated reminders. You guys are the most disorganized bunch of idiots I've ever worked with. I have 20 years of experience in this industry, and this is the worst. NENR, in this case, me. I will kill you. Be afraid. Be very afraid. I wish. I did rehearse that a million times in my mental theater, but it actually went something more like this. I'm sorry to hear that. You know, I've been taking your insults for a while now, and it's unfortunate that it seems we won't be able to do business anymore. I'd recommend you take a good look at where this unhappiness and anger is actually coming from. In any case, I wish you well. If you would like to order product, we'll be happy to supply it, but only if you can conduct yourself without profanity and unnecessary insults. You have our fax number. All the best, and have a nice day. Click. I did this once via phone and once through email. So what happened? I lost one customer, but the other corrected course and simply faxed orders again and again and again. Problem solved. Minimum revenue lost. I was immediately 10 times happier. I then identified the common characteristics of my top 5 customers and secured 3 or so similarly profiled buyers in the following week. Remember, more customers is not automatically more income. More customers is not the goal and often translates into 90% more housekeeping and a paltry 1 to 3% increase in income. Make no mistake, maximum income from minimal necessary effort, including minimum number of customers, is the primary goal. I duplicated my strengths, in this case my top producers, and focused on increasing the size and frequency of their orders. The end result? I went from chasing and appeasing 120 customers to simply receiving large orders from 8, with absolutely no pleading, phone calls, or email haranguing. My monthly income increased from $30,000 to $60,000 in 4 weeks, and my weekly hours immediately dropped from over 80 to approximately 15. Most important, I was happy with myself and felt both optimistic and liberated for the first time in over 2 years. In the ensuing weeks, I applied the 80-20 principle to dozens of areas, including the following. 1. Advertising. I identified the advertising that was generating 80% or more of revenue, identified the commonalities among them, and multiplied them, eliminating all the rest at the same time. My advertising costs dropped over 70%, and my direct sales income nearly doubled from a monthly $15,000 to $25,000 in 8 weeks. It would have doubled immediately had I been using radio, newspapers, or television instead of magazines with long lead times. 2. Online affiliates and partners. I fired more than 250 low-yield online affiliates, or put them in holding patterns to focus instead on the 2 affiliates who were generating 90% of the income. My management time decreased from 5 to 10 hours per week to 1 hour per month. Online partner income increased more than 50% in that same month. Slow down and remember this. Most things make no difference. Being busy is a form of laziness, lazy thinking, and indiscriminate action. Being overwhelmed is often as unproductive as doing nothing, and is far more unpleasant. Being selective, doing less, is the path of the productive. Focus on the important few and ignore the rest. Of course, before you can separate the wheat from the chaff and eliminate activities in a new environment, whether a new job or an entrepreneurial venture, you will need to try a lot to identify what pulls the most weight. Throw it all up on the wall and see what sticks. That's part of the process, but it should not take more than a month or 2. It's easy to get caught in a flood of minutia, and the key to not feeling rushed is remembering that lack of time is actually lack of priorities. Take time to stop and smell the roses, or in this case, to count the pea pods.